I thought I knew what betrayal felt like. I thought I understood what it meant to be the forgotten child, the one who never quite measured up. But nothing, and I mean nothing, could have prepared me for the moment I sat in that mahogany-paneled law office, listening to my parents' will being read, and hearing that my sister Emma would inherit $3.7 million while I would receive exactly $5. $5. Not 5,000. Not 500. 5 actual dollars, like I was some stranger they'd met on the street. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how I discovered that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are the ones preparing to heal us in ways we never imagined. But before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand how I got to that chair, in that room, staring at a lawyer who couldn't even make eye contact with me as he delivered what felt like the final blow in a lifetime of being second best. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt overlooked by your own family, ever wondered why some siblings seem to get all the love while others get the leftovers, then please stay with me. And if this story touches you, if it reminds you of your own family struggles, I'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to hear more of these real stories. Sometimes we need to know we're not alone in our pain, you know? Growing up in the suburbs of Cincinnati, Ohio, I always felt like I was living in Emma's shadow. She was 2 years older, valedictorian of her class, captain of the tennis team, and could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I was the artistic one, the dreamer, the one who spent hours in my room writing stories and painting watercolors that my mother would glance at with a polite smile before asking if I'd finished my homework. Emma got a full scholarship to Northwestern University. I got a lecture about how art school was a waste of money and ended up at the local community college, paying my own way with a part-time job at the Barnes & Noble in the mall. The difference in how they treated us wasn't subtle. Emma's achievements were celebrated with fancy dinners and photo albums. Mine were acknowledged with a pat on the head and a suggestion that I should consider something more practical. When Emma graduated summa cum laude and landed a job at a prestigious consulting firm in Chicago, my parents threw her a party with 50 guests. When I finally transferred to a 4-year university and graduated with a degree in English literature, they sent me a card with $20 inside and a note saying they were proud of me for finally finishing something. I tried not to let it bother me. I really did. I told myself that parents have different ways of showing love, that maybe I was reading too much into things. But the pattern was undeniable. Christmas gifts that were clearly afterthoughts compared to the carefully chosen, expensive presents Emma received. Birthday parties that felt more like obligations than celebrations. And the constant comparisons. Why can't you be more like Emma? Became the soundtrack of my childhood. My father, Robert, was a successful insurance executive who believed that success was measured in dollars and degrees. My mother, Patricia, was a former teacher who'd given up her career to raise us, but somehow had never quite forgiven me for not following the path she'd laid out in her mind. Emma fit their vision perfectly. I was the square peg they kept trying to force into their round hole. The worst part wasn't the obvious favoritism, though. It was the way they'd deny it when I brought it up. "We love you both equally," they'd say. "We just have different ways of showing it." But equal love doesn't explain why Emma got a new car for her 16th birthday while I got a lecture about responsibility and had to buy my own beat-up Honda with money I'd saved from babysitting. Equal love doesn't explain why Emma's college tuition was paid in full while I was told that taking out student loans would build character. I moved to Portland, Oregon after college, partly for a job at a small publishing house, but mostly to put distance between myself and the constant reminder of my inadequacy. I built a life there. Not a glamorous one, but a good one. I had a small apartment near the river, a job I enjoyed editing manuscripts for emerging authors, and a tight-knit group of friends who appreciated my dry sense of humor and my ability to remember everyone's birthday. I dated a few guys, had my heart broken once or twice, and slowly learned to find my worth in places other than my parents' approval. Emma, meanwhile, had gotten married to a successful lawyer named David, bought a house in Lake Forest, and was living the exact life my parents had always envisioned for both of us. She'd call me every few months, usually when she was feeling guilty about something, and we'd have these stilted conversations where she'd ask how I was doing and I'd give her the sanitized version of my life. We weren't close, but we weren't enemies either. We were just two people who happened to share DNA and a complicated history. My parents and I maintained a polite but distant relationship. They'd visit Portland once a year, usually combining it with a trip to see Emma in Chicago. They'd take me to dinner at some mid-range restaurant, ask about my job, and fill me in on Emma's latest promotion or vacation. I'd smile and nod and count down the hours until they left. It wasn't that I didn't love them. It was that I'd finally accepted that they loved me in their own limited way, and that was going to have to be enough. Then, last spring, everything changed. My mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The doctors said she had maybe 6 months, possibly less. I flew back to Cincinnati immediately, took a leave of absence from work, and spent the next 4 months helping to care for her. Emma came when she could, but she had her job and her family, and somehow it fell to me to be the one sitting in hospital rooms and managing medication schedules and holding my mother's hand during the bad days. During those months, I thought we were finally connecting, really connecting. She'd tell me stories about her childhood, about her dreams of being a writer before she met my father, about the regrets she carried. She'd ask about my work, about the books I was editing, and for the first time in my life, she seemed genuinely interested in my answers. I started to believe that maybe the illness had given her perspective, that maybe she was finally seeing me as more than just the disappointing daughter who'd never lived up to her potential. The night before she died, she held my hand and whispered, "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry for everything." I didn't know what she meant exactly, but I chose to believe it was her way of acknowledging the years of feeling less than, of being the afterthought. I forgave her right there in that hospital room, told her I loved her, and that I understood she'd done her best with what she knew. She died on a Tuesday morning in October, with me holding one hand and my father holding the other. Emma was on a plane from Chicago, but she didn't make it in time. The last thing my mother said was my name. Just Sarah, soft and quiet, like she was trying to tell me something important but couldn't find the words. My father was devastated, completely lost. He'd built his entire identity around being Patricia's husband, and without her, he seemed to shrink into himself. I stayed another 2 weeks to help with the funeral arrangements and to make sure he was okay. Emma flew in for the service, of course, looking elegant in her black designer dress and her grief that seemed appropriate and measured. She gave a beautiful eulogy about what a wonderful mother Patricia had been, how she'd sacrificed everything for her family, how she'd been the heart of our home. I couldn't speak at the funeral. Every time I tried to think of what to say, all I could remember were the ways my mother had made me feel small, unimportant, like I was somehow less worthy of love than Emma. I knew it wasn't fair to think of her that way, especially so soon after losing her. But grief is complicated. You can love someone and still be hurt by them. You can forgive someone and still carry the scars they left behind. My father followed her 6 weeks later, a massive heart attack in his sleep. The doctor said it was textbook broken heart syndrome, that losing my mother had literally killed him. I was back in Portland when it happened, trying to piece my life back together when Emma called with the news. I flew back again, helped plan another funeral, and tried to comfort my sister, who was crying the kind of deep, soul-wrenching sobs that I'd somehow never been able to access when it came to my parents. After the second funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathy cards stopped arriving, Emma and I met with the family lawyer, Howard Brennan, to settle the estate. Howard had been my parents' attorney for 30 years, a kind man in his 70s who'd known me since I was a child. He'd always been nice to me, always remembered to ask about my writing, and I'd assumed he'd make this difficult process as painless as possible. The law office was everything you'd expect from a family attorney who'd been practicing since the Carter administration. Dark wood paneling, burgundy leather chairs, and the smell of old books and furniture polish. Emma sat to my right, composed and professional in her black suit, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I wore the only black dress I owned, a simple thing I'd bought at Target for my college graduation, and felt underdressed and out of place, which was pretty much the story of my life. Howard shuffled through the papers on his desk, adjusted his glasses, and began to read. The house, valued at about $400,000, would be sold, and the proceeds split between Emma and me. That seemed fair. Their retirement accounts, life insurance policies, and investment portfolios, totaling about $3.2 million, would go entirely to Emma. I felt the air leave my lungs, entirely to Emma. But Howard wasn't finished. There was a separate provision for me, a special bequest, he called it. He looked up at me over his glasses, and I could see something in his eyes that I couldn't quite identify. Pity? Embarrassment? He cleared his throat and continued reading. To our daughter Sarah, who has always marched to the beat of her own drum, we leave the sum of $5 so that she might understand the value of money and the importance of making her own way in the world. The room went silent. Emma's tissue froze halfway to her face. Howard's voice trailed off, and he looked down at the papers as if he couldn't believe what he'd just read. I sat there, stunned, feeling like I'd been slapped. $5. After 32 years of being their daughter, after holding my mother's hand as she died, after flying back and forth to help with their care, after spending my savings on plane tickets and hotel rooms and missed work, they'd left me $5. Emma reached over and grabbed my hand. Sarah, I had no idea. I swear I had no idea they were going to do this. Her voice was shaking, and I could see the genuine shock in her eyes. Whatever our issues, she wasn't cruel. She hadn't known. I couldn't speak. I just sat there, staring at Howard, waiting for him to tell me it was a mistake, that there was another page, that surely my parents hadn't meant to leave me less than they'd spend on a coffee and a donut. But Howard just kept staring at the papers, and I knew it was real. This was their final message to me. This was how they wanted me to remember them. There's more, Howard said finally, his voice quiet. There's a provision about your grandmother's house. My grandmother, my mother's mother, Eleanor Walsh, had died when I was 12. She'd been the one person in my family who'd ever made me feel special, who'd encouraged my writing and my art, who'd tell me stories about her own dreams of being a novelist. She'd lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, and after she died, my parents had sold it and put the money toward Emma's college fund. Your grandmother's house was sold in 1998, Howard continued, but there were items. Personal belongings that your parents kept in storage. According to the will, those items are to be given to Sarah. Items. So I got $5 and whatever dusty memories my parents had shoved into a storage unit. I wanted to laugh, but I was afraid if I started, I'd never stop. Or maybe I'd start crying instead. I wasn't sure which would be worse. Emma was squeezing my hand now, and I could feel her genuine distress. Sarah, this isn't right. I'm going to give you half of everything. I don't care what the will says. You're my sister. I looked at her, this woman I'd spent my life resenting, and realized that in this moment, she was the only family I had left, the only person who knew what it felt like to lose the people who'd raised us, even if they'd raised us differently. Thank you, I whispered, but I need to think about this. Howard handed me a key and an address. The storage unit is paid up through the end of the year, he said. Take your time. I left the law office in a daze. Emma wanted to come with me to the storage unit, but I needed to do this alone. I needed to face whatever remnants of my grandmother's life my parents had deemed worthy of keeping, and I needed to do it without an audience. The storage facility was one of those sprawling complexes on the edge of town. Rows and rows of orange metal doors with numbers stenciled on them. Unit 247 was about the size of a walk-in closet, filled with boxes labeled in my mother's careful handwriting. Eleanor's books, Eleanor's clothes, Eleanor's papers, Eleanor's furniture. I started with the books. My grandmother had been a voracious reader, and the boxes were filled with everything from classic literature to romance novels to books on writing and storytelling. I remembered sitting in her living room, surrounded by these same books, listening to her read me stories and tell me that words had power, that stories could change the world. I pulled out a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird and found a note in the margin, written in her distinctive handwriting. Remember, you can't really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view. The next box contained her clothes. Dresses from the 1960s and 70s, still smelling faintly of her perfume. A jewelry box with her wedding ring and a few simple necklaces. A silk scarf I remembered her wearing to church every Sunday. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was a manila envelope with, "For Sarah," written across it in her handwriting. My heart started pounding. I sat down on the concrete floor of the storage unit and opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a letter, written in the same careful script I'd seen in the margins of her books. "My dearest Sarah," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I hope you know how much I loved you. I hope you know that you were the light of my life, the one who reminded me that there's magic in the world if you know how to look for it." I had to stop reading. I was crying now, really crying, for the first time since my mother died. Here was the grandmother I remembered, the one who'd seen something in me that my parents never had. The letter continued. "I know your parents don't understand you, sweetheart. I know they think love means pushing you to be someone you're not. But I see who you are, and you're perfect exactly as you are. You're going to write stories that matter, Sarah. You're going to touch people's hearts with your words, and you're going to live a life that's true to yourself, not true to what other people think you should be." But it was the next paragraph that made me gasp out loud. "I've left you something, Sarah. Something your parents don't know about. In 1987, I bought a small piece of land in Oregon near a town called Bend. I'd always dreamed of living somewhere with mountains and trees, and I bought it as a place to maybe build a cabin someday. I never got the chance, but I kept paying the taxes on it all these years, and I've arranged for it to be transferred to you when you turn 30. I counted backward. I'd turned 30 2 years ago, which meant the land is yours now, sweetheart. It's about 40 acres, with a small stream running through it and a view of the Cascade Mountains. I've also set aside some money to help you get started there, if you want it. Not much, but enough to build something small and simple. The account information is in the envelope." I fumbled through the envelope and found bank statements and legal documents. An account with nearly $200,000. Money my grandmother had somehow saved and invested over the years. Land in Oregon worth who knows how much. A future I'd never imagined, left to me by the one person who'd ever truly believed in me. But there was more to the letter. "I need to tell you something about your parents, Sarah. Something that might help you understand why they are the way they are. Your mother was pregnant before Emma, a little boy they named Michael. He was born premature and lived only 3 days. Your mother blamed herself, thought she'd done something wrong, and she became terrified of loving too much again. When Emma was born, she was so afraid of losing her that she held on too tight, made Emma the center of everything." I stared at the letter, trying to process what I was reading. I had a brother I'd never known about, a brother who died before I was born. When you came along, your mother had convinced herself that the best way to protect you was to make you strong, to make you independent. She thought if she didn't spoil you like she had Emma, if she made you work for everything, you'd be better prepared for the world. She was trying to love you by making you tough, sweetheart. She was wrong, but she was trying. I thought about my mother's last words, her apology. "I'm sorry, Sarah. I'm so sorry for everything." Maybe she'd finally realized that her way of protecting me had just hurt me instead. "Your father went along with it because he didn't know any better. He loved you, Sarah, but he was scared too. Scared of losing another child, scared of doing the wrong thing. They both were. It doesn't excuse how they treated you, but maybe it explains it." I sat in that storage unit for hours, reading and rereading the letter, processing this new understanding of my family. They'd had their reasons, twisted and misguided as they were. They'd been operating from fear and grief and a desperate desire to protect me in the only way they knew how. But the letter wasn't finished. "There's one more thing, Sarah. Something I need you to know about the will. I've been saving this money for you for years, and I've made arrangements with Howard Brennan to make sure you get it. But I also know your parents. I know they're going to try to teach you one last lesson about the value of money and hard work. They're going to leave you something small in their will, something that's supposed to make you appreciate what you have." My grandmother had known. Somehow she'd known exactly what my parents would do. When that happens, when you're sitting in Howard's office feeling hurt and forgotten, I want you to remember this letter. I want you to remember that you are loved, that you are valued, and that you have a future waiting for you that's bigger and more beautiful than anything your parents could have imagined. I was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in my chest. All this time, I'd had someone looking out for me. All this time, I'd been loved in a way I'd never understood. But the letter still wasn't over. I've asked Howard to hold on to something else for you. Something that will help you understand your parents better. Ask him about the box marked, "For Sarah's understanding." But only open it when you're ready to forgive them, sweetheart. Only when you're ready to let go of the hurt and see them as the flawed, frightened people they were. I drove back to Howard's office in a daze. He was just locking up when I arrived, but he saw me coming and waited. My face must have told him everything because he just nodded and said, "You found Eleanor's letter. She said there was a box, something to help me understand." Howard studied my face for a long moment. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Sarah? Some truths are harder to carry than not knowing." I thought about my mother's last words, about the apology I'd never understood. "I'm ready." He led me back into his office and pulled out a small wooden box from his safe. Inside were photographs, letters, and documents that told the story of my family's secret grief. Pictures of a tiny baby boy in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines. A death certificate for Michael Robert Thompson, born and died in March 1985. Letters between my parents and doctors, filled with guilt and blame and desperate questions about what they'd done wrong. And then, at the bottom of the box, a letter from my mother to my grandmother, written shortly after I was born. "Mom, I'm so scared I'm going to lose her too. I'm scared that if I love her too much, if I make her too precious, something will happen to her. I know you think I'm being too hard on her, but I can't bear the thought of losing another child. If I make her strong, if I make her independent, maybe she'll be okay. Maybe she'll survive in a world that takes beautiful things away from people who love them too much." I understood then. The emotional distance, the constant pushing, the way they'd made me fight for everything. It wasn't because they didn't love me. It was because they loved me so much they were terrified of losing me, and they'd convinced themselves that the only way to keep me safe was to make me tough enough to survive without them. It was wrong. It was so incredibly wrong, and it had caused me years of pain and self-doubt. But it came from love. Broken, twisted, misguided love. But love, nonetheless. I spent the next week going through the rest of my grandmother's belongings, finding treasures and memories that painted a picture of a woman who'd lived fully and loved deeply. She'd been a teacher, like my mother, but she'd also been a writer, something I'd never known. I found notebooks filled with stories and poems, rejection letters from publishers, and a few acceptance letters too. She'd been published just a few times in small literary magazines. She'd lived the life I'd always dreamed of living. Among her papers, I found the deed to the land in Oregon, and all the documentation I'd need to claim it. 40 acres of pine trees and meadows, with a small stream and a view of the mountains. It was everything she'd described, and more. I drove out to see it the day before I was supposed to fly back to Portland, and I knew immediately that this was where I belonged. The land was raw and wild, but beautiful in a way that made my chest tight with possibility. I could see exactly where I'd build a cabin, where I'd plant a garden, where I'd sit and write the stories that had been building inside me for years. This was my grandmother's gift to me, her way of ensuring that I'd have a place to be exactly who I was meant to be. But first, I had to take care of something else. I drove back to Emma's hotel and found her in the lobby, looking exhausted and worried. "Sarah, thank God. I've been trying to call you. I've been thinking about the will, and I want to transfer half of everything to you. It's not right what they did." I sat down beside her and took her hand. "Emma, I need to tell you something. Something about why they left the money the way they did." I told her about the letter, about our brother Michael, about the land and the money my grandmother had left me. I watched her face change as she processed the information, saw the moment when she understood that our parents' favoritism had been as much of a prison for her as their neglect had been for me. "They were so afraid of losing me that they never let me fail," she whispered. "They never let me figure out who I was without their approval. Do you know I've never made a decision without wondering what they would think? I married David because they approved of him. I took the job in Chicago because they thought it was prestigious. I don't even know what I actually want." We sat there for a long time, two sisters finally understanding that we'd both been casualties of our parents' fear and grief. Emma had been loved too much, controlled too much, made too precious to ever be free. I'd been pushed away, made to fend for myself, taught that love was something you had to earn. Neither of us had been truly seen for who we were. "Keep the money. I told her finally. Keep it and use it to figure out what you actually want. Take some time, travel, try new things. Be the person you would have been if they'd let you fail sometimes. Emma started crying then, and I realized it was the first time I'd ever seen her cry without trying to look elegant doing it. What if I don't know how to be that person? What if I'm too old to start over? You're 34, Emma. You have your whole life ahead of you. And you have me now if you want. Really have me. Not just the polite phone calls and obligatory visits. We can figure this out together. She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I'd like that. I'd really like that. I flew back to Portland that night, but only to pack up my apartment and quit my job. I had a new life waiting for me in the mountains of Oregon, a life my grandmother had made possible through her love and her faith in who I could become. I had land to build on, money to live on while I wrote, and for the first time in my life, I had a sister who saw me as more than just the family disappointment. The cabin I built was small but perfect. One room for sleeping, one for living, and one for writing. Big windows that looked out over the meadow and the mountains beyond. A fireplace for the cold nights and a porch for the warm ones. I planted a garden the first spring, vegetables and flowers and herbs that my grandmother had written about in her journals. I adopted a dog from the local shelter, a golden retriever mix named Scout, who loved to chase sticks and sleep by the fireplace. But most importantly, I started writing. Really writing, not just editing other people's stories, but telling my own. I wrote about family and forgiveness, about the complicated ways we love each other and the even more complicated ways we hurt each other. I wrote about the land and the mountains, about the way the light changes throughout the day and the way the seasons transform the same landscape into something entirely new. My first novel was published 2 years after I moved to the cabin. It was a small press, not much money, but it was my story told in my voice, and that felt like everything. The book was about a woman who inherits land from her grandmother and uses it to build a new life after her family falls apart. Fiction mostly, but with enough truth to make it real. Emma read it and called me crying. I see us in this, she said. I see all of us, and I understand now. I understand why you had to leave, and I understand why I need to leave too. She'd been seeing a therapist, she told me, working through the ways our parents' overprotection had stunted her growth. She'd taken a sabbatical from her job, much to David's dismay, and was considering a career change. She wanted to try teaching, maybe work with kids who needed someone to believe in them. I want to be the person who sees potential in children that other people miss, she said. I want to be what you needed when we were growing up. She visited me at the cabin that summer, and we spent long evenings on the porch talking about our parents and our childhood and the people we were becoming. She helped me plant a memorial garden for our parents and our brother Michael, flowers that would bloom each spring as a reminder that love and loss are often the same thing. Do you think they knew? She asked one evening as we watched the sunset paint the mountains pink and gold. Do you think they understood how much they hurt us? I thought about my mother's last words, about the letter my grandmother had left explaining their motivations. I think they knew they'd made mistakes. I think they were sorry, but I also think they did the best they could with the tools they had. Do you forgive them? I considered the question. The hurt was still there, probably always would be, but alongside it was something else now. Understanding, compassion, the knowledge that they'd been young parents dealing with unimaginable grief, trying to protect their children in the only ways they knew how. I'm working on it, I said finally. Some days are better than others. Emma nodded. I think that's all any of us can do. Just keep working on it. She stayed for 2 weeks, and by the time she left, something had shifted between us. We weren't just sisters anymore. We were friends. People who'd chosen to love each other despite our complicated history, despite the ways our parents had pitted us against each other without meaning to. The $5 from my parents' will sits framed on my desk now, next to a photo of my grandmother and a copy of my first published story. It's a reminder of where I came from and how far I've traveled, both literally and emotionally. Some days I look at it and feel angry all over again. Other days, I see it as the strange gift it actually was. The thing that pushed me to find my real inheritance. My grandmother's letter hangs on the wall above my writing desk, a daily reminder that I am seen, that I am valued, that I have stories to tell that matter. She believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself, and she made sure I'd have everything I needed to build the life I was meant to live. I've been living on the land for 3 years now, and I've never been happier. I wake up to the sound of birds and the rustle of wind through the pine trees. I write in the mornings when the light is soft and golden, and I spend my afternoons working in the garden or hiking the trails that wind through my property. In the evenings, I sit on the porch with Scout at my feet, watching the stars come out over the mountains and thinking about the strange ways life unfolds. Emma visits regularly now, sometimes bringing David and their daughter, sometimes coming alone when she needs to think. She's decided to go back to school to get her teaching certificate, and she lights up when she talks about it in a way I never saw when she talked about her consulting job. She's learning to make decisions based on what she wants rather than what she thinks she should want, and it's beautiful to watch. We've started a tradition of calling each other on the anniversary of our parents' deaths, not to rehash old hurts, but to remember them as they were, flawed people who loved us imperfectly, but genuinely. We share stories about the good times, the moments when they got it right, the ways they shaped us into the people we've become. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found my grandmother's letter, if I'd walked away from that storage unit with just the hurt and the $5. Would I have stayed angry forever? Would Emma and I have remained strangers sharing a last name? Would I have ever found the courage to build the life I actually wanted? I don't know the answers to those questions, but I'm grateful I don't have to find out. My grandmother's love reached across the years to catch me when I was falling, to show me that I'd been valued all along, just not in the ways I'd been looking for. Now I'm writing my second novel, a story about siblings who find each other after their parents die, about the ways family can wound us and heal us, sometimes in the same breath. It's fiction, but it's my truth too, and I think my grandmother would be proud of me for telling it. I think about her often, especially in the evenings when the light slants through the trees and makes everything look magical. I wish I could tell her about the cabin, about the garden, about the words that flow out of me like water from the stream that runs through the property. I wish I could tell her that her faith in me was not misplaced, that I did grow up to write stories that matter, that I did learn to live a life that's true to myself. But maybe she already knows. Maybe love like that transcends death. Maybe it lives on in the choices we make and the lives we build and the forgiveness we find. Maybe the real inheritance isn't money or land or even understanding. Maybe it's the courage to keep loving despite the hurt, to keep reaching for connection despite the fear, to keep believing in the possibility of healing even when the wounds feel too deep to close. The other day, I got a letter from a reader who'd found my book in a small bookstore in Vermont. She wrote to tell me that my story had helped her understand her own complicated relationship with her family, that it had given her the courage to reach out to a sister she'd been estranged from for years. "Thank you," she wrote, "for showing me that it's never too late to choose love over resentment." I cried when I read that letter, the same way I cried when I found my grandmother's letter in that storage unit, because I realized that this is what she'd meant when she said I'd write stories that matter. Not that I'd become famous or win awards or make lots of money, but that I'd touch people's hearts with my words, that I'd help them feel less alone in their own complicated relationships with love and loss. That's the real miracle of my inheritance, not the money or the land, though I'm grateful for both. Not even the understanding of my parents' motivations, though that's been healing in its own way. The real miracle is that I've learned to see love even in its most broken forms, to find grace even in the deepest disappointments, to build something beautiful from the scattered pieces of a complicated family. If you're listening to this and you're struggling with your own family relationships, if you're feeling forgotten or overlooked or like you're just not enough, I want you to know that you're not alone. We all carry wounds from the people who were supposed to love us unconditionally. We all have stories about the ways we were failed by the very people who were supposed to protect us. But I also want you to know that those wounds don't have to define us, that sometimes the people who hurt us the most are also the ones who shape us into who we're meant to become. That love is complicated and messy and often disappointing, but it's also persistent and surprising and capable of reaching across time and space to catch us when we're falling. My parents left me $5 and a lifetime of feeling like I wasn't enough. But they also gave me a sister who's become my closest friend, a strength I never knew I had, and the determination to build a life that's authentically mine. My grandmother left me land and money, but more importantly, she left me the knowledge that I was seen, that I was valued, that I had something important to offer the world. The $5 inheritance that felt like such a cruel joke turned out to be exactly what I needed to find my way to my real inheritance. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us is also the best thing, disguised as something else entirely. Last month, I was cleaning out one of the boxes from my grandmother's storage unit when I found something I'd missed before. Tucked between the pages of her copy of Anne of Green Gables was a small envelope with my name on it. Inside was a single sentence written in her careful script. The best stories always start with someone who feels like they don't belong. I laughed when I read it, because it was so perfectly her. Even from beyond the grave, she was still teaching me about the power of story, about the way our deepest wounds can become our greatest sources of strength. I don't know if she planned for me to find that note, or if it was just a happy accident, but it felt like one final gift from the woman who'd believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. I'm sharing this story with you because I know there are others out there who feel like they don't belong, who've been made to feel like they're not enough by the very people who were supposed to love them unconditionally. I know there are siblings who've been pitted against each other by parents who didn't understand that love isn't a zero-sum game. I know there are people carrying wounds from childhood that feel too deep to heal, but I also know that healing is possible. That understanding can come even after the people who hurt us are gone. That love can be found in the most unexpected places, sometimes right under our noses, sometimes in the form of a letter that's been waiting for us to find it. Emma and I are planning to write a book together, a memoir about our journey from estranged sisters to true friends. We want to tell the story of how we learned to see each other as whole people rather than just the roles our parents had assigned us. We want to show other families that it's never too late to choose love over resentment, understanding over blame. She's getting married again next spring to a man named Tom who makes her laugh and supports her dreams and doesn't care that she's still figuring out who she is at 37. She asked me to be her maid of honor, and I said yes without hesitation. The wedding will be small, just family and close friends, and she wants to hold it here on the land, under the pine trees where our parents' memorial garden blooms. I'm honored to be part of her new beginning, just as she's been part of mine. We're both still learning how to be sisters, how to love each other without the interference of our parents' expectations and fears. Some days we get it right, and some days we stumble, but we keep trying. We keep choosing each other, over and over again. The cabin has become a place of healing for both of us. Emma comes here when she needs to remember who she is underneath all the roles she's played. I stay here to write and to tend the garden and to learn the rhythms of a life lived close to the land. We're both still works in progress, still figuring out how to be the people we were meant to be before our parents' grief and fear shaped us into something else. I've been thinking a lot lately about forgiveness, about what it means and what it doesn't mean. I used to think forgiveness was about absolving people of their wrongdoing, about pretending that the hurt they caused didn't matter. But I've learned that forgiveness is really about freeing yourself from the weight of resentment, about choosing to see people as complex beings capable of both great love and great harm. I forgive my parents now, most days. Not because what they did was okay, but because I understand that they were doing their best with the tools they had. They were young people dealing with unimaginable loss, trying to protect their children in the only ways they knew how. Their methods were flawed, sometimes deeply harmful, but their intentions came from love. That understanding doesn't erase the years of feeling less than, the self-doubt that still creeps in sometimes, the way I still catch myself seeking approval from people who remind me of them. But it does give me perspective. It helps me see that their treatment of me was more about their own wounds than about my worth. I think about our brother Michael sometimes, the little boy who lived only 3 days, but whose death shaped our entire family. I wonder what kind of person he would have been, whether he would have been the artistic dreamer like me or the high achiever like Emma. I wonder if our parents would have been different if they'd gotten to raise him, if they would have been less afraid, less desperate to control the outcome. But mostly, I think about how he's part of our story, even though we never got to know him. He's in the garden I planted for him, in the way Emma and I learned to see our parents' love as something complicated and wounded, rather than simply absent. He's in the understanding that every family is shaped by loss, that we're all walking around with invisible wounds that influence how we love and how we hurt. I've started leading writing workshops here at the cabin, small groups of people who want to tell their own stories of family and healing. There's something powerful about gathering in this space that was built from love and loss, about sharing our words under the same pine trees where my parents' ashes are scattered. The participants come from all walks of life, but they all have one thing in common. They've been shaped by complicated families, and they're trying to make sense of their stories. One woman, about my age, is writing about growing up with a mother who suffered from severe depression. Another is exploring his relationship with a father who was an alcoholic. A young man is trying to understand why his parents divorced when he was 12 and how it affected his ability to trust people. They're all learning what I learned, that our wounds can become our sources of strength, that our deepest hurts can become our greatest gifts. We meet once a month, sitting in a circle on my porch, sharing our work and our insights. There's something magical about the way stories connect us, the way one person's truth can illuminate another's experience. We're all writing our way toward understanding, toward forgiveness, toward a deeper appreciation for the complex ways we love and are loved. The workshops have become one of my favorite parts of living here. There's something deeply satisfying about creating a space where people can explore their truths without judgment, where they can find the words for experiences they've never been able to articulate. I think my grandmother would be proud of this too, of the way I'm using her gift to help others find their voices. I've been thinking about legacy lately, about what we leave behind when we're gone. My parents thought they were leaving Emma the tools for a successful life and teaching me the value of hard work and self-reliance. In their own way, they were trying to set us up for happiness, even if their methods were misguided. My grandmother left me land and money, but she also left me something more valuable, the knowledge that I was seen and valued for who I was, not who I might become. She left me the understanding that love doesn't have to be perfect to be real, that sometimes the people who believe in us most are the ones who step back and let us find our own way. I hope that when I'm gone, I'll leave behind stories that help people understand their own complicated relationships with love and loss. I hope I'll leave behind a legacy of choosing connection over isolation, forgiveness over resentment, understanding over judgment. I hope the people who attend my workshops will carry forward the lessons we've learned together about the power of story to heal and transform. But mostly, I hope I'll leave behind the knowledge that it's never too late to choose love, that families can be rebuilt, that relationships can be healed, that understanding can come even after the people who hurt us are gone, that sometimes the worst thing that happens to us is also the doorway to our greatest growth. The $5 from my parents' will still sits on my desk, but it doesn't hurt to look at it anymore. Now it's just a reminder of how far I've come, of how much I've learned about the complicated ways people love each other. Sometimes I think about framing it next to my grandmother's letter, a before and after of my understanding of love and family. Emma and I talk about our parents differently now. We still acknowledge the ways they hurt us, but we also remember the good times, the moments when they got it right. We remember the way our father would take us for ice cream after Little League games, even when we lost. We remember the way our mother would sit with us when we were sick, reading stories and bringing us soup. We remember that they were whole people with their own dreams and disappointments, their own wounds and fears. That's what I've learned from this whole experience, that people are complex and contradictory, capable of great love and great harm, sometimes in the same breath. That the people who hurt us most are often the ones who love us most, just in ways we don't understand or appreciate. That healing doesn't mean forgetting or excusing, but it does mean choosing to see the whole picture, not just the parts that hurt. I want to end this story by saying something to anyone who's listening and feeling like they don't belong in their own family. To anyone who's been made to feel like they're not enough, like they're too much, like they don't measure up to some impossible standard. To anyone who's sitting in a lawyer's office right now, feeling like they've been forgotten by the people who were supposed to love them most. Your worth is not determined by how other people treat you. Your value is not measured by the size of your inheritance, or the attention you received, or the ways you were celebrated or overlooked. You are worthy of love simply because you exist, because you have your own unique gifts to offer the world, because your story matters. Sometimes the people who are supposed to love us don't know how to do it right. Sometimes they're too wounded by their own experiences to see us clearly. Sometimes they're so afraid of losing us that they push us away, or so afraid of not being good enough that they try to control us. But their inability to love us well doesn't mean we're unlovable. It just means they're human, flawed, and frightened, and doing their best with the tools they have. I've learned that love is not a finite resource. There's enough for everyone, enough for the golden child and the scapegoat, enough for the favored and the forgotten. The trick is learning to find it in unexpected places, to recognize it even when it doesn't look like what we think it should look like. If you're struggling with your own family story, if you're trying to make sense of the ways you've been loved and hurt, I encourage you to keep looking for the love that's hidden in the complications. It might be in a letter you haven't found yet, in a conversation you haven't had, in a perspective you haven't considered. It might be in the very experiences that feel like rejection or abandonment. And if you can't find it in your family of origin, remember that you have the power to create your own family, your own legacy of love. You can choose to love better than you were loved, to see more clearly than you were seen, to build something beautiful from the scattered pieces of your complicated story. That's what I've done here on this land my grandmother left me. I've built a life that honors both the love and the loss, the joy and the grief, the ways I was failed and the ways I was cherished. I've learned that healing doesn't mean forgetting, and forgiveness doesn't mean excusing.